there, this is the Sherlock Brew Podcast series brought to you by SherlockSuperCoach.AI. On the show, you'll find actionable insights and bite-sized conversations with HR and business leaders on topics that provoke thoughts and new paradigms to better understand and develop Gen Z and young millennials on your team. We'll help you look at new possibilities and gain perspectives to level up young professionals and help them surge ahead on your team. When it comes to AI, I'm really deep into it. An important part of my business actually focuses and talks about AI on a daily basis. But to your point, it's not just AI as a general concept. It doesn't help anybody. So we focus on creators, YouTubers, and bloggers. But what have you seen as maybe specific AI tools, or maybe it's just a mindset or approach to AI inside the workplace? Are people putting structures around it? Are Gen Zs feeling, engaged or threatened by it?
Yeah, I think Gen Z, I would say that they're probably more accustomed to accepting like a more disruptive technology. I think if you ask the same question about other generations, I think there's a little bit more concern about job stability and so forth. And I think that changes everything. I think the way Gen Z thinks about their job or career, they more relate to like the gig economy and so forth. And so there's a little bit more ambiguity they're comfortable with. And that means like something like generative AI being a little bit disruptive is not as received as like a more anxious way as like another generation, for instance. I think what I've seen in terms of like thinking about, whether it's generative AI or different types of AI in the workplace, I really think there's a large acknowledgement that this is going to change basically everything. I think we haven't gotten to a point of like, what does that look like? There's a lot of ideas and innovation. I think there's definitely an awareness. I think people are starting to better understand it, but I think there's still a big void in terms of how to leverage it and optimize it. And then how do you actually deploy and implement? And that's where I think Generation Z can actually be very beneficial to a workforce. Because again, it's a little bit more second nature. Throughout their entire existence, they've had to adapt to new technologies that are even hard to fathom for some people. And so I think there's a lot more comfort that may lead to some experimentation, even just like we were talking about with social media posts, like people just doing it because they're just used to doing it. And sometimes that itself will drive innovation. And so I'd see we're still very, very, very much in the early stages of this, but I think Gen Z is a way to kind of disrupt that. And you see a lot of the actual financial services organizations targeting specifically Gen Z coming out of college. And they don't know exactly what, but they just know that they need that workforce from an innovation standpoint because they're going to fall quickly behind.
Wow. It's so fascinating now we're talking about AI, and I agree completely because the tech is out there, whether it's ChatGPT or all these hundreds of thousands of companies really getting VC money and developing these features, who knows who's, what's popular, what's useful. But to your point, I feel like the training program to kind of help people understand that these are the tools we have available and here are ways we can use it together. So for instance, I have noticed with my line of work and the clients I serve, yes, it's helpful to have certain tools. I'm not going to name them, to write these 5,000 word articles with an eye blink. But, I think number one, it helps people overcome that blank page. But at the end of the day, the tonality, the style, the quirkiness, the humor, all those things, all what makes good writing or good writing for your company are still super relevant. That cannot be replaced currently by AI. So definitely like your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would say we're not too far away from it being replaced by AI. I mean, you think about some of the prompts that you can put into ChatGPT, for instance, it can change the actual tone and style. And so we're not too far away, even when you think about the other pieces of AI, where it's like, whether it's producing videos of people who you're not recording, you're just literally producing a video that someone never stepped in front of camera, or mimicking different songs and so forth. There's a lot of capability there. And I think back to the Gen Z, is like, they kind of understand that there's like limitless possibilities and they're not afraid to kind of like just try it. If you think about, and I may be taking a little bit of a detour here, but I'll come back around to this. But when you look at how technology was implemented in organizations historically, it usually followed a very, call it, sequential process, which was you have a need, you have clear business requirements. Those business requirements are transitioned into technical requirements. And based on that, then you choose the technology best for you that fits those tech requirements. That is kind of like the DNA for like Gen X, even some millennials, obviously baby boomers. Gen Z, they're going to think about, hey, what technology is actually bringing the most innovation? And how can I actually force fit my life and get value from that technology? So it literally flips that value proposition around. And so there's a little bit like when you think about Gen Z in terms of things like AI and so forth, they're going to be able to like drive it in a way that's just not natural for other generations.
I think what are some of the things you have noticed or you would recommend these AI apps to include or to implement? I think you mentioned certain things like the frequency just in time when there isn't a human available. There's a Gen Z, I'm envisioning someone who's 22, 25, traveling for work for the first time, feeling lonely, really nervous at the airport, thinking about, is my hair looking right? Is my outfit right for my job? I want to talk to someone. And there's a certain level of comfort there. But what are some of the features you think that are really necessary to engage with Gen Z from an AI app perspective?
Yeah, and I don't think this is just an AI thing. I think it's a technology thing. I think the first thing, it has to be incredibly easy, incredibly intuitive. Like when I engage with different vendors of different technology and so forth, sometimes they come and they have a very specific, here's what we're trying to solve for. And the push I always have to them is like a lot of the innovation comes from technology that has broader uses. And then the thing that actually drives that technology acceptance or adoption is like the unexpected uses of that technology. And so when, people are thinking about how to create different AI platforms and different technology, it's like, if you just focus on the ease and the intuitiveness and like essentially like build it, they will come mentality and let the people tell you what the value is. I think that is a better way to kind of help understand how you're going to create a roadmap to determine like how you can add additional value based on the technology that you're creating, as well as like how do you potentially think of other use cases that you weren't even thinking about before. Like people are going to hack technology to do, they think about Google, like now it's probably 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago.
98.
Yeah, I just had a mild panic attack about my own health, my own age. I remember like Ask Jeeves, for instance, but like the use case of Google and how people use Google initially was basically just to look up things that exist on the internet. Google then transitioned into like basically being knowledge management to some regards, where people were asking it questions. That wasn't the original vision of Google, 25 years ago. And so like the more a creator can think about how can different ways this can be used, how people are going to use this to hack their whether it's for their own personal life or for the workplace, and create it to be a little bit more open-ended, a little bit more flexible, a little bit more agile, that's going to actually really help drive the adoption of whatever technology or AI that's being introduced.
Love it. Love it. I was just reflecting on being a user of Sherlock, a super coach, for instance. I think you inspired me to think about how I actually use it, what I find most helpful. So for instance, there's that part of the knowledge base. I know I have my left brain, right brain, but I didn't know there are different regions. And L1, L2, R1, R2 was like, okay, let me learn more. And then by taking a pretty quick questionnaire, I realized that I am more activated in a certain area and I feel a lot of pride in it. Yep. I like to innovate. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm creative. But at the same time, it also says you don't like to just pay attention to the analytics and the numbers and things like that. I'm like, oh, okay. So now if I'm talking to someone who is way more analytical than I am, now I have a different set of tools and questions I can try. And I have absolutely tried it on people. And the results are really surprising. Those are not necessarily the questions I would lead with, but then help these people open up as a result of it. So I really like that use case. It's just a point of reflection. And the other is to be able to kind of let myself flow in the background. I think the app really taught me to think about my first position versus second position. Why did this person do? What can I see from his or her perspective? And that was really, really interesting too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks so much for watching. I hope you find it helpful. We'll soon be back with our next podcast. In the meantime, please share this episode with your friends and colleagues.